everybody. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for our virtual town hall meeting, COVID-19 Economy, Recovery, and Outlook. My name is Molly Cooper. I'm the Compliance and Operations Manager here at HD Wealth Strategies. And today we're going to explore some of the economic realities regarding this COVID-19 virus, the response, and then as well as provide an outlook for what we see going forward. We really want this to be an engaging experience for you, and I can see we already have a lot of attendees on the call, which is great, and we hope to address as many of your questions as possible. So just a couple logistics quick. You can see on your webinar control panel over there on the side of your screen, there's a chat section. So you can go ahead and use that function to ask your question at any time. And you can also see a function where you can virtually raise your hand. So when we open it up for questions, you can use that function and also just ask the question to the panel yourself at the end. So I am also super excited to introduce our panelists today. So of course we have our two partners at HD Wealth Strategies, your financial advisors, Stephen Higgins and Allison Schmidt. And then we are also very thankful to have Strider Elass joining us. So Strider is a senior economist at First Trust Portfolios, and he is part of the First Trust economics team that Bloomberg has ranked as one of the top forecasters of the US economy over the last several years. And additionally, Strider and his team have been ranked the most read research team by advisors. I know we read their stuff every week. And Strider speaks regularly at events both around the country and abroad. So while these circumstances are obviously unique, Strider certainly isn't new to engaging with people on the subject of economics. So again, Strider, thank you for joining us today, and to all of you who took the time to join us this morning, thank you as well. And I will pass it to our hosts, Stephen and Allie.
Molly, thank you so much. Obviously, Allie, thank you, and Strider, thanks for being here with us.
Sure.
Today, one other person I wanted to mention behind the scenes is John Proctor. John is our client relations specialist here at HD Wealth Strategies, and he is kind of running the dashboard of this meeting behind the scenes and has worked really hard to put this together and reach out to all of you to get you set up. So John, I know you're watching and listening. Thank you so much for the work you've put into this.
Absolutely.
Hey, obviously this is an election year, and it's seemingly impossible for this COVID-19 issue and economic, reality that comes with it not to be politicized. And it can feel like those who are advocating for a speedy recovery of the economy are underappreciating the tragic human toll that is happening with the medical situation. And then there are those who are more cautious about reopening the economy, and people think that those folks could be ignorant of the economic impacts of the shutdown. And I think being compassionate about people and wanting a speedy and successful recovery of the economy, those are not mutually exclusive. And I can tell you that Allie and I, after many conversations, are of that belief that we as a country, we've got to find the most medically safe way to reasonably begin to open the economy as quickly as possible. And hopefully that comes through this call. And hopefully with Strider during this meeting, we can discuss what that might look like. Allie?
Yeah, exactly. And, I think that's such a great place to start. Strider, also, thank you so much for being here. I think that this is going to be great, really informative. And I think we should start by looking at, what does that opening the economy really look like? I mean, at this point, certainly no one knows, when we'll be back to, call it business as usual, and opening the economy will absolutely be a process. But your team at First Trust, has looked at the length of the shutdown and what that has on the impact of the recovery. Essentially, it seems the longer we remain closed, the harder it's going to be to recover to those pre-COVID-19 levels. Can you just maybe talk a little bit about how you guys see that playing out?
Sure. So obviously, there's a lot that's going on, especially when we look at COVID-19, and it is very tragic that so many people have passed away already from this around the world. In fact, just in the United States, it's crossed over 30,000 people. And we all kind of sit at our homes all day, every day now because we're on lockdown. And we're looking at the media, we're looking at news, and there's ways, and most of us are following along every single day, or even maybe every 15 minutes or hour by hour, with people watching the death counter go higher and higher and higher. And so I think it is a thing that people are very scared of, watching these numbers go up. And the big thing is, and I have a friend whose dad died from this just suddenly. He was over he was fairly healthy, but he had a little bit of some of the things that are worrisome if you get it. And he went into the hospital, and within a couple days, he died. And I mean, how tragic that is. And if any of you on this call are dealing with somebody that you know, or a loved one or family member, just my heart goes out to you. This is a terrible thing. But today I want to try and take it from an economic point of view, and to kind of give you kind of the facts and some of the statistics behind the numbers. And it might look like I don't care, but number one, I mean, I care a lot. I've got a 92-year-old grandfather who I flew out to Arizona because he really wanted to get back to Colorado. He lives in Colorado Springs, and flew out there the other week to drive him home. And I mean, it is, especially if you're over 65 and you have a compromised immune system, you do need to take all precautions, be very, very safe. But saying that, when you take a look at the United States, for instance, on every single day or every single week, about 50,000 people in the United States die weekly from disease and car accidents and everything else. And so I think it is important to put these numbers into perspective a little bit here, because yes, 30,000 people have died from this, but if you actually look at weekly deaths right now in the United States, they're still lower than where they've been over the last 5 years on average. That's including the COVID-19 deaths. And so when we focus just on one section, I think we miss out on a lot of the bigger picture. And I'm not trying to say this isn't a serious issue, and we can get more into some of the details there. But I think it is really important to look at the economic ramifications, because they have been significant. And one of my favorite economists, Thomas Sowell, if any of you've ever followed his stuff, he can literally take, in one sentence would be equivalent to me taking a full page to write out a thought. He can pack so much information and so much wisdom in just one sentence. And I saw this quote from him the other day, and I think this gets to the heart of it for me here. And I just want to read it to you really quick. It says, "Weighing the benefits against costs is the way most people make decisions, and the way most businesses make decisions if they want to stay in business. Only in government is any benefit, however small, considered to be worth any cost, however large." And I think the costs that we've seen from shutting down the economy have far outweighed the benefits, in my opinion. And you think about it, there's 30 million small businesses in the United States, 30 million, and almost all of these have been shut down. And that they employ about 60 million people, which is about half of our workforce, 47.5% of our workforce. And so all of these people are now not only without business right now, a lot of them will be going under. And the longer this drags on, the more and more of these companies that will start to go under, and they won't be returning. And that's the tragic part of this government shutdown, is that it is going to put a lot of people on unemployment. We've already seen 22 million people file for unemployment insurance just in the last 4 weeks. Unemployment, the rate's going to be around probably around 15, maybe even 20%, could even be higher than that for the month of April. We'll go from the lowest unemployment rate that we've seen in 50 years in February to the highest unemployment rate by far that we've seen in 50 years in April. I mean, it's unheard of what's going on right now. And so we believe every single day this goes on, the longer this takes for government to really start to reopen business again, the more and more people that will be infected, the more and more small businesses that will go under and not come back, and the longer the recovery will take. We went early on. We didn't believe that this shutdown would last as long as it has, and obviously it's lasted a fairly long time now. It looks like we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel now, but we originally were forecasting a V-shaped recovery out of this for the economy as well as the stock market. We still believe it'll be a pretty nice V for the stock market, not as steep as it's been over the last couple of weeks, but for the economy, it's probably going to be more of a U-shaped recovery. And a big reason is because of small business. An interesting study was actually done a few years back in 2016 by the JP Morgan Chase Institute, which is actually the bank's think tank. And what they found back in 2016, they did a survey. They looked at all small businesses, and it was kind of interesting there what they were looking at. They were looking at if revenues went to zero, which obviously we thought never would that ever happen. Even in a recession, your revenues don't really go to zero unless you go under. But if revenues went to zero, how long would the median small business have in cash reserve? And the median small business has 27 days, they found. If you're a retailer, that number's around 18 days. If you're a restaurant, that number's only 16 days.
Wow.
So, I mean, we're well past that now. And so
Right.
these small businesses are reeling. I mean, it's been a big issue here. And so for us, we think that the costs of shutting down the economy have outweighed the benefits. And obviously, a lot of people will disagree with that. But I think partly what we're not taking into account is when you go through a recession, when you're laid off, I mean, your world is completely upended. And probably most of us that are on this call, I'm sure we know people who have been laid off. Maybe us ourselves have not, or maybe you're retired, so you're not worried about that. But I read an article, well, I've read actually several articles where if you look at suicide helplines right now in many different states or many different counties, they're getting the most volume of calls that they've ever received. And for instance, in San Francisco, 14 people so far have died from the coronavirus. And over the same period, 12 people have committed suicide there as well. And so there are a lot of costs and benefits that we have to weigh here on both sides. And I think the costs that we'll see over this period of time are going to be pretty dramatic.
I think that that's such a good point that you mentioned the difference between an economic recovery and a market recovery. Because I think a lot of times, and especially in the headlines, those two things can kind of be looked at as one, and they really are
Sure.
very different. So you guys at First Trust, it sounds like, kind of see the market as more of a V-shaped recovery. Obviously, who knows what's really going to happen. But kind of looking at just market factors in that way, and then the economy more of a U-shape. I just think that that's really interesting, just because I really do feel like there's so much of that gets kind of put together. So thanks for kind of differentiating those two as well.
Sure.
For sure. So Strider, we're obviously 22 million people filing for unemployment in the last few weeks. Those are we know what sectors in our hometowns, we know where those are coming from: restaurants, retail, things like that. What are some other sectors that are kind of leading that charge, and how much of an impact did the signing of the CARES Act have on that number? Because it looked like as soon as the government basically said you can move a significant amount of your payroll over to us for the next 4 months, how much of that after 4 months or after we kind of get reopened, what percentages of those jobs do you see coming back, say, in the next 6 months to a year? So what sectors are getting hit the hardest, and what percentage of those jobs do you think will come back quickly?
Yeah, by far the biggest sector that's been hit is leisure and hospitality, which makes up a lot of employment. But basically every sector to some degree has been hit. Financial services have not been hit really, but every other sector has been hit, with leisure and hospitality by far the biggest. Construction had a fair amount of layoffs too. But I think it does bring up a very interesting point about because government, obviously the stimulus, and I'm not a fan of stimulus ever during a recession, because I think the market figures it out eventually. It finds the bottom, and then it will start to recover. And I think stimulus usually not only delays the recovery because we don't find the true market bottom, but I think on top of that, it also grows government. It's never a temporary thing. But I believe in this case, because the recession that we're going through is like no recession we've ever seen before in history. I mean, this is a government-induced recession by them shutting down business. It's plain and simple. That's what it is. And we've never seen that before. And so in this case, I think if government is going to completely shut off all these businesses, stimulus is needed. I mean, we do need to support all of those workers that have been laid off. and on top of that, all these small businesses to give them a fighting chance to be able to actually reopen when the economy gets going again. But saying that, the benefits that government is putting out there, I mean, this stimulus package, and I think it's great that it went through so quickly. But when I really think about what's going on, I mean, it went through so quickly that I think a lot of the numbers were kind of just thrown out there. Well, this will help, and so there's a lot of people that are going to be making a lot more money being unemployed than if they were employed. I actually went through it. This took a while because I had to go through every single state, and every state files for unemployment differently. But basically, I calculated what's the break even where if you're working, it's equivalent to what you'd be making for unemployment. And I wish I could remember the number in Colorado off the top of my head. I believe it's either high 40s or low 50s for Colorado where the break even is. So if you make below high 40s or low 50s, you'll be making more money for the next 4 months at least being unemployed than being employed once that $600 kicks in every single week. For California, for example, it's 54. I live in San Diego. It's $54,750 is that break-even point. So if you make below that, you'll actually be making more money being on unemployment than employment. And so I think that this is going to be hard over the next month or two to really get people back into the system, especially those that are in the leisure and hospitality industries that are making lower wages. For instance, in California, if you make $30,000 a year, right now on unemployment, you're making 153% of what you normally make. So say you make $100 a day, you're now making $153 a day. And that's, I mean, a 50% increase from your normal pay. That's significant. And so I look at that and I think, well, this is something that we do need to be concerned about. It's going to add to things moving forward here for sure.
Right. So I guess what you're saying is, while some small business owners have been obviously impacted through the shutdown and their inability to really cover bills for more than a month, as you said, is that as the recovery begins to open up, if it's in the shorter term, they may be hamstrung by being able to get their employees back.
Yes, I think so. I think partly we'll see some productivity gains as a lot of these businesses, even larger businesses that pay kind of lower wages. I think a lot of these businesses will get more productive. They'll maybe try to hire back their employees, and if their employees say, you know, I don't want to be hired back, because usually you have to be looking. That's the thing with unemployment, is you have to be actively looking for a job and willing to accept a job. But one of the things that we saw here is that because of this crisis, they basically said, we're going to waive that. At least they have in California. You don't need to be looking for a job right now whatsoever, because we know, you know, the situation that we're dealing with. But yeah, I think it's going to be hard, so it's going to take more time, and so we will see an elevated unemployment rate here for probably quite some time. We're at 3.5% just a couple months ago. Who knows where we're going to go in April? It could be, say, I mean, I think worst case 25%, which is just wild to think about. And then I think we'll come down, but I don't think we'll hit probably 3.5% for, if we do again, for years. And partly it will be due to some productivity gains where people were hired that, you know, weren't really a huge use to the company, that they realized quickly after the fact, I guess, and so they're no longer hired there, and they'll be looking for jobs. But also, I think structurally we'll see a little bit of a shift here because of the generous benefits that government's providing for at least 4 months, and that's what it is it's at least 4 months, and usually these programs can be extended with very little people worrying about that if things still look tough for these individuals.
Strider, anecdotally, starting to learn, you know, trying to sift through this data and just the amount of numbers, and starting to learn that, you know, other people have been allowed to apply for unemployment benefits that were not able to apply for before, like people in the gig economy, Uber drivers, for example, while never having paid into the unemployment system, are now able to apply for unemployment benefits, is there any way to tell what percentage of that 22 million people are people like that?
You know, I'm sure there will be at some point. I haven't seen anything that out there yet that has broken that down in an effective way. It would have to probably come from the state level, obviously, where they would break out those numbers. I think in Colorado, just this week, they're starting to take unemployment applications for independent contractors, and that'll start to be getting paid out. And I'm sure, I mean, it's a significant part of the economy.
Wow.
And even a lot of these people have it for a second job. But if they no longer have, they might still have their current job, but if that second job is gone, they could still file for unemployment. I know doctors here in San Diego that, you know, make a significant amount of money, but they've been hit, obviously, as elective surgeries have gone away, and a lot of them are, although they're still working, they're working a lot less hours. They've been filing for unemployment as well and receiving it. So I think the term for unemployment right now is very, very broad. And
Right.
or in terms of getting the benefits, it's very, very broad right now. And short term, that's okay, but over the long term, you know, it's something that will have to be paid for.
Yeah,
But each of those applicants is unemployed, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So if you look over the last four, and I don't, all of them haven't been processed because there's been so many coming in, but just over the last 4 weeks, that's 22 million people that have filed for unemployment insurance around the country that have been processed. That's not how many have actually filed. That's how many have actually been processed. So why? I mean, just incredible numbers. I mean, if you think about that, so last week, or we just got the number yesterday, 5.2 million people filed. The week before it was 6.8 million, or 6.6. The week before that it was 6.8. The week before that it was 3 million or so. And before that, the highest number we'd ever seen in history for any 1 week was around 700,000 back in the 1980s during the recession. I mean, we didn't hit anything like this during the Great Recession we went through in 2008, 2009. So it's wild, and that, I think that's the biggest point I'd want to make here, is that the data that we are going to see here when it starts coming out for the month of April, some of it's come out for March and it's been really ugly. I mean, really ugly. But for April, it is going to be catastrophically ugly. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. And so one thing that we've been doing, and we can pass it on to you to send to everybody on a weekly basis if they're interested, is we're following weekly indicators. We call them high frequency data. And I think that's what's really important right now, is to have this data that we can look at on a weekly basis, because I think it gives us a better perspective of what's actually going on today, because this will be a very, very steep but very, very short-lived recession. Really, when businesses open back up, that's going to send us back on our way, and growth will resume. But we'll probably see a 20% at least annualized decline in Q2. And so you look at a lot of these weekly indicators, they're off substantially. And I think that's something that's going to continue.
Yeah, and that actually leads pretty well into kind of what we were looking at for the next kind of point to talk about here. So there's a lot of models, predictions, kind of worst case, best case scenarios out there. But like you were saying, you know, kind of looking at, yes, Q2 is going to be, you know, really difficult to navigate, and these numbers are going to look, you know, horrific. I mean, on a, you know, kind of on a historic scale. But as far as kind of moving past that and looking to the next 6 to 12 months, what do you kind of, you and the First Trust economics team, I mean, what do you see as kind of the most likely outcome, you know, how we get there, what assumptions go into just really what's our path forward, you know, kind of out of what is going to be, you know, really historic couple months, weeks, quarters?
Sure. Yeah, and this, I mean, this is where I get so excited about this, because I think really you need to focus on the entrepreneur. You need to focus on innovation and creativity, and just think about all the inventions that have come online just in the last 10 years. And really, I think personally right now, there's two big ways that you can look at the world. You can either look at it through a magnifying glass, or you can look at it through a spyglass. And you think about that magnifying glass, for instance, it takes something that's really small in a small place and it blows it up really big. You're focused on that one tiny thing. And I think that's where we are today, is we're living in this magnifying glass point of view, a worldview. And I think it's really been driven by social media. I would say this is the first ever social media induced panic that we've seen. And so what's interesting to me is that that's one way you can look at the world, and that's how we really all are looking at the world right now, because there's really, we're at home and this is all we see, and it feels like it's never going to end. But I think it's really important to be able to back out and kind of have a spyglass point of view. And you think about that spyglass, you remember pirates, they have that big long glass that they go on their ship and they're looking out over the they're pulling it out, they look through it to see what's out there on the horizon. Is there land ahead? It gives them a lot clearer picture, a wider view. And I think that's what we really need today more than ever, because when you think back just to January and February of this year, I mean, economic growth was accelerating. It looked like GDP in the first quarter was going to grow at about a 3.5% annualized pace. That was before the government shut down the economy. Now with that shutdown, March, we saw a huge contraction for the month of March with economic activity falling off the cliff. And so we've gone from about 3.5% growth to minus 3.5% now for GDP. And so I think what's really important here is that, well, what's changed from January and February to now? And we're all well aware government has shut down the economy. But what really has driven growth, what really has driven this entire recovery over the last 11 years is the same thing that's going to drive the recovery coming out of this too, and it's that entrepreneur and all those new technologies. I mean, just think about over the last 15 years, the cloud, smartphones, tablets, 3D printing, hydraulic fracturing, horizontal drilling, which has just upended the energy industry, nanotechnology, biotechnology. And you think about that iPhone. Imagine if this was 15 years ago. First off, we wouldn't have near the social media that we do today, obviously. And so maybe this wouldn't have been treated the way that it has. But even if it was and we're on lockdown, I mean, think of how hard that would be. We'd communicate to each other on the phone. Some people had Blackberries at that point that had internet access, but there's no video chat. Skype, I think, was just getting started. So you may have been able to Skype, but you look at how far we've come just in the last 10 years and the way that companies today are being built. They're very, very asset light. And I think that's a huge point to make is as more and more companies are being built today, is they have very, very high profit margins, and they're being built on the network effect. And what I mean by that is you think about, think back like 30, 40 years when the very first fax machine was produced. I mean, how valuable was that fax machine? Right. Now, it cost you about $6,000 to buy that, but how valuable is it? I'd say, well, I mean, it wasn't valuable at all. You couldn't fax anybody anything. You were the one that bought the first fax machine. I mean, you probably look pretty stupid, because what are you going to do with that thing? And so as the fax machine, as the network grew, as more and more people bought fax machines, that fax machine became more and more valuable to you because you had a bigger network. And that's the world that we live in today, where as more and more people are part of that network, it becomes more and more valuable, which is one reason I believe that this coronavirus vaccine that's being produced by all these different companies, they've been collaborating. The amount of research, the amount of data that's being shared is just unbelievable. And if this was 15 years ago and we were trying to come up with a vaccine, who knows how many years this would take. But because of where we are today, it's unbelievable. And I think that's what's really important. I mean, an example, just a recent example, and I'm not saying buy Zoom or sell Zoom or whatever. I'm not recommending anything here, but I think it's interesting to look at Zoom because we're all now familiar with it probably in some way or another, hearing about it, or at least maybe trying it, using it with families now. in December, so they went public about a year ago. They've been around for about 9 years, but in December they had their largest month ever, and in a single day they breached the 10 million mark of people that were using their service. Well, you fast forward just a couple months, and we have the coronavirus, and then all of a sudden Zoom says, well, hey, schools, we want to offer this up to you to use so you can teach your students still. 90,000 schools took Zoom up on that in 20 different countries. I mean, that's incredible. What a service. And not only that, but in March, 200 million people use Zoom in a single day. And so that's a 20x increase from just a couple months ago. I mean, the fact that they can take on all that extra bandwidth and it's just this software. And you think about profit margins when you start monetizing stuff like that. And these are the companies that are continuing to come to fruition, and they're going to continue. I mean, this is a small blip in time that we're dealing with. And so I personally look at this, especially from a stock market perspective, as probably one of the best opportunities that most of us have had, no matter how old you are in this call, to get into the stock market at a 20% discount right now, 30% before. But if you're looking out over the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 2 years, 5 years, I think you're going to be handsomely rewarded for investing now, because I think the trajectory of the economy is going to get back on solid footing here very quickly, and these companies that were thriving before this artificially induced recession will start to thrive again by probably the end of year or into next year, and new technology gains will come from all of this. One thing I think we've really seen, and I think every recession, every crisis you go through, things do change, and I think people exaggerate those changes a lot. So they say, I've heard people say, we'll never see a full football stadium again, or things like that. And it feels like it right now. How can we ever go back to everybody sitting next to each other at a football stadium or on a plane or traveling or any of that? And we felt I remember we felt the exact same way after 9/11.
Right.
I mean, what a tragic thing that we all experienced. And it was scary. And for a long time after, people did not want to travel. And travel just a couple months ago was sitting at the highest levels we've ever seen. But things do change on the margin. And I say the biggest change that came out of that was we had a lot more security, TSA, and whatnot that we have to go through now. And I think that's probably been a benefit out of it. I think this time around, the real benefit that we're going to see is that it takes time for technology, for people to adapt to technological change. And this has forced people to try new things and to adapt. And the reality is that this is incredibly productive technology for people to use. I travel all over the country speaking to clients of financial advisors and to financial advisors alike on the economy. And the fact I'm doing more meetings now in a single day than most I can do during a day usually is maybe a breakfast, lunch, and a dinner, or speaking at a conference or something like that. Well, I'm averaging, maybe 5 to 7 of these a day here, and it's not costing me travel. It's not costing me meals out or any of that stuff on the company. So that adds productivity over time. And I don't think face-to-face interaction is going to go away. I think it's the most important thing that you can do. But I do think if some of these meetings will move as people realize, wow, this feels almost the same, and I don't see them in person, but I get to sit at the comfort of my home or office or whatever, and we can still accomplish what we need to accomplish. And so I think that's what's we're going to get is a big boost in productivity of new technologies or ideas that just that have been around a couple of years, but people just some have adopted, but not really adopted. And you think about even grocery stores. I mean, I've known that Target, that Vons by me, other grocery chains have a kind of a mobile thing where you just buy everything online and then you just go and have them bring it to you. And I've never used it. It's free. Never used it before. Well, now I have, and I'm thinking to myself, why did I never use this before? This is so easy.
Right.
And
Right.
as I mentioned my 92-year-old grandfather. He's just a wonderful guy, and we talk frequently. And he was telling me he's never used Amazon Prime before. And he said, well, he's like, yeah, I bet you use Amazon Prime, right? And I said, well, yeah, of course. And he's like, well, I just started using it,
Yeah.
and I cannot believe how easy it is for me to buy whatever I want. And I said,
Mhm.
yeah. And there's already
I can't
100
imagine
and
what he's buying.
yeah, there's already 100 and I know when you first,
Face masks.
yeah, probably way too many things. But you think, I mean,
Yeah.
Amazon's interesting. This was before the panic that we went through, but there's estimated to be about 105 million Amazon Prime subscribers just in the United States. There's about 118 million households in the United States. So let's just say it held true, one per household. I know some have multiple, but if it was one per household, that means that about 85% of households had an Amazon Prime membership. But that number for sure has gone up. And I think a lot of these memberships that are saving people time and energy and making things a lot more efficient have increased over this period in time. So I think it's not going to be right away. When you take a 20% hit in the second quarter here, and that's why I say the weekly data that we're seeing is just horrendous. But it will be short-lived. This isn't caused by a normal recession is caused by a slowdown in demand and then an oversupply. And none of that was the case. In fact, the consumer was the strongest that we'd really ever seen coming into this. And companies' inventories were actually fairly lean because of that. And so this is just an artificially induced recession that I believe it's not going to be a V-shaped, as I said, it'll be more of a U because it's going to take time to get back to where we were. But these companies are going to continue to innovate and create, and I think that's going to be the real the biggest benefit that we get from all of this is that there's going to be so many new technologies that are just life changing that come out of this, just like we've seen over the last 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And I think it is just so fascinating, really, the adoption that has been required just in the last, call it 10 to 25, 30 days
Sure.
that people are having to do and talk about the ability to actually keep a lot of the productivity online. Like you said, 10 years ago, I mean, it would have looked a lot different. I mean, I remember, my dad just the other day was saying that, he was an attorney and he said, if this would have happened when I was practicing, there's no way, there's no way that we would have been able to continue working with clients and to continue working in a productive way. Whereas, now we're kind of able to, do this type of thing and kind of continue to have the wheels turning, at least in some parts, of the economy. And I think that's just such an interesting point, and to kind of see where we're going to go moving forward too. What will kind of the new normal be? Hopefully, Strider, we're still going to see a face-to-face and everybody
Yes,
on the call.
I hope so too. Yeah.
But it's interesting, and it's it's certainly a different deal. So kind of on that note, we will go ahead and open it up to questions. So like Molly said, if you do have a question, please look to that chat section on your webinar control panel. You can use the function to type in your question into the chat, or you can actually utilize the raise your hand feature on the panel. And if you raise your hand, then we'll actually have John unmute your line so that you can ask Strider or obviously Sivarai any questions on your own. And as those are coming in, Strider, I guess I'd love to hear, just kind of briefly from an economic standpoint, how is the U.S. holding up as in comparison and kind of relative to other countries? Because obviously this is not a U.S. issue, right? This is a global pandemic that we're dealing with here.
Sure. Yeah. It's from just the data perspective, the U.S. is holding up pretty well in terms of overall deaths, in terms of overall cases that have been positive. The numbers are very high relative to the rest of the world, but partly is because we have a large population too. And so if you look at it per million people, we're holding up very well here. What I found interesting is a lot of the countries that have not shut down their economies are performing just as well as the United States, if not maybe slightly better on a per million basis. And so I tend to feel like we are over time, the biggest issue I'd say is the lack of data that we have.
Real quick, another question. I'm going to
Sure.
answer a quick one that came in. The question was, how long do unemployment benefits last? Do they run out? It varies state to state, but unemployment benefits in Colorado run out at 26 weeks. The CARES Act basically added an additional $600 per week for 4 months. So about another $10,000 for that 4-month period, give or take there. But yeah, 26 weeks. Those have been extended in the past, like they were in the Great Recession, 2008, 2009 period. But Strider, another question for you. We've got a few here that have come through, and I'm going to try to summarize this one as much as I can. But basically, there are economic risks to keeping things closed. This guest asked the question, what are the possible risks if we were to open too early, have to shut down again, or have a re-spike in cases? What does that risk look like?
Yeah, I mean, that would be significant as well. I think looking at from the president's press conference last night and reading about the plan, it looks like a pretty conservative plan. And so people are going to continue to die from the coronavirus moving forward here, tragically, just as people will for the next couple weeks continue to die from the flu until it's over, the season's over, and the coronavirus season will end at some point too. And more people will get sick from this. And so we could see a big spike again. I think with the social distancing that's been put in place, and I think most people are being very careful. I don't see any, and I don't know, I'm not a doctor, but I don't see any big spike coming, because I think this is going to be a very gradual process to reopen the economy. It's not like tomorrow we're open so everybody can go do anything that they want. There's still a lot of protocols that are being put in place. And on top of that, it seems like the government's figured out ways to find where new hotspots are forming and trying to nip it in the bud before it grows to too significant of an issue. But yes, if this did get significant again to a point where they were concerned and it was overrunning all hospitals, which the interesting thing is it really didn't see, New York, a couple hospitals were overrun. But for the rest of the United States, I mean, hospital beds for the most part were very, very vacant, and a lot of hospitals were impacted significantly because of that, because they had so many vacancies, they have to let go of a lot of their workers. So if it does come back, so long story short, if it does come back and we do shut down the economy again, I think that would be very damaging. That's not in our forecast. It's obviously a possibility. I think it's a very small possibility with the precautions that everybody's taking, especially the governors of every state are taking. But we know that for sure, even if it does come back, I think what we've learned from this is shutting down the entire economy is not the way to go about this. I think shutting down targeted areas would be more effective. But what we do know is those that are at most risk are those over 65, as I keep saying, that have immune deficiencies, and that, if you look at the plan, those people basically are not really allowed to be freed to enter society in a way again until after phase 3, which for some of these states could be months away.
Okay, so the next we have, it says, Strider, what is your opinion of the proposed Worker Health Coverage Protection Act? Do you believe it will become law?
I'm not super familiar with that plan, to be honest with you. So that's something I'd be happy to look into and get back to you. But I have not had time to look through that entire thing or even part of it. So I don't want to lead you in any wrong direction with something I don't know. But I'm happy to look into it for you, and we can get back to you on that.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll get some info from Strider and then follow up on that.
Sure. Strider, I'm going to try to, there was a question that was asked, kind of a question, kind of a statement, and I want to make sure I respect that, and I'm going to try to formulate that. So hopefully the asker of this question feels like their question gets asked and answered. But it seems like, and you're starting to see this through the country, that there seems to be the willingness to comply with the measures is fading. And it seems to be this battle between kind of the grip that the government has on their ability to control these measures and the willingness of the people to be controlled. And I don't know if that's coincides with the data getting a little bit better over the last couple of weeks, or people just sick of being inside, or that, I guess, how do you measure, or how do governments start to stair step out of these controls while, I guess, maintaining the, I guess, call it respect or call it compliance of the people? Because if you really think about it, the strength of compliance is really in the people's willingness to do so. You're not going to write disorderly conduct tickets to 1 million people honking their horns at the state capitol. How does that actually work in practice?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what we're living through right now, is seeing how that works in practice. I think one of the reasons that we're fortunate enough to live in the United States, or the biggest reason, is because we have freedoms, and we have freedoms to essentially live our lives the way that we see fit for ourselves. And I think what we've seen here is some government overreach. I think majority of people, there's always those that are trying to cause mass chaos and ruin the system and be irresponsible. And you read stories about people who have gone into grocery stores and coughed on everything, and just really inconsiderate people. But I think most people realize, and I think the media and government, from everything that we've seen on TV and read, has really ingrained in people that this is a serious issue that we're dealing with here. And so I think most people will go back to their lives, but I think they'll be more cautious than they had been before. But I think it does get to the bigger question, is how much reach should government have?
Last question?
Yeah, I was gonna say, so one last question, and then Strider, we'll kind of let you get on your way here. So what do you anticipate as an effect on the housing market, was this person's question?
Yeah, so we've been looking into this a lot, and I think it's a little early to say right now, but housing's actually been a real bright spot over the last couple years. Construction's been a real bright spot. Home building's been a bright spot for the economy. It looked like it was going to be another real bright spot this year too. It's definitely going to be hit a little bit here. I think things will get back to normal, and the reason I say that is we really need to be building in the United States about 1.5 million units a year just to keep up with population growth and scrappage rates. And we've been building well under that for basically this entire recovery that we're in so far. And the reason is because before that, we were overbuilding for so long. Well, by about 2010, we worked off all that excess inventory, and we just didn't build that inventory back. I mean, we're still at very low inventory levels. We're seeing a lot of homes right now being pulled off the market, which makes sense, right? If you have a home on the market, the chance of you selling it here probably in the next a month or two is probably fairly slim, and so you don't want it just sitting there on the market. And so I think there's going to be little inventory, but I think once the economy opens back up, so I'd say everywhere by August or so, we'll start to see a lot of these properties come back on the market. But in the meantime, we could see actually some price pressures higher for the existing inventory for those that are looking, because there'll be some demand. I don't think as much demand as we saw in February, but the demand will come back because people do need housing. And this is a lot different from what we went through in 2007, 2006, 2007. We were not anywhere close to a housing bubble here in the United States. And on top of that, interest rates are really sitting at rock bottom levels, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And so in the short term, just like all economic data, it's going to look ugly. It looked ugly yesterday when we got housing starts, but it's going to improve over time. We don't think that the housing recovery is over. This will be a blip on the radar, just like we've seen in most other data right now.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, it's helpful.
Hey, so we've heard a lot today, and I think what we're all feeling is this balance of the struggle between our emotional, our social, our desire for everybody to be healthy and safe, and then everybody wanting to maintain their financial prosperity. And as we wrestle with that internally, sometimes it creates these gut feelings or these reactions. But I think that's just you, our clients and people out there being human and trying to wrestle with things that seem like they're competing because the media tells you they need to be competing, but they're not. They're all very human desires and wants, and they're all rational, and it all makes sense. And I think that's okay. And I think it's okay to be comfortable. I think people running around right now with, glaring confidence are just masking their lack of real understanding. So wrestling with these issues, being part of this call, I've got to tell you, we had well over 100 people stay on this call for the duration, and I think that means that people want the data. It's not about what we agree or disagree with. It's about taking in as much rational data as we can. So Strider, thank you so much for being part of what we're doing. We try to provide as many resources to our clients as we can, both economic, financial, and in the financial planning realm. Allie, I miss seeing you. I can't wait to see you again.
Right.
Haven't been apart from you this long in over a decade. Molly, John, thank you for the work you've put in. Strider again, and First Trust, thank you for you and your support team that gives us a ton of assistance all the time.
Absolutely.
And to all of you, our clients, you're the reason we're here. You're the reason why we do the things that we do every day. You mean the absolute world to us, and we can't wait to see you again soon as well. So thank you so much. That wraps up our call. Have a great weekend. If it's the weekend, I don't even know what day it is. So
awesome. Thank you, Strider.
Yeah, thank you guys. Take care. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.